G'day everybody, it's Danny from Board Game Sanctuary here. Zoos are a theme that I absolutely adore in modern board games. I simply love the idea of building habitats, housing different animal species, and then try my best to make them as happy as possible. In this video, we're going to dive deep into this Euro inspired by the original PC game Zoo Tycoon and see whether it's worth the price of admission. So my tufted capuchin monkeys breed, creating these offspring represented by these tiny cubes. Isn't it just adorable? Euros do come across really abstract, don't they? I mean, everything's shaped like a cube these days. Well, this game does come with 234 individually cut wooden animal pieces, which I sorted out into this toolbox that I bought from the hardware store last week. Look, I even labeled the cover so that we wouldn't get confused. On second thought, I'll stick with the cubes. Zoo Tycoon is a board game where you'll become a business mogul, as well as an animal warrior to ultimately become king of the jungle as you build the most thriving zoo possible. To achieve this, you'll need to become a flagship theme park by literally climbing these 3 flagpoles on this game board. You'll do this by raising animal awareness through your conservation efforts, increasing your popularity, and also developing key educational programs. At the end of the game, players will compare their conservation value with their popularity value. Their lowest score out of the 2 is their final score. Whoever has the best final score at the end of the game becomes the Lion King, the winner of the game. Everything in this game is interconnected. When it comes to popularity, when your animals are happy, so are your guests. It's all about public perception. Throughout the game, players will gain popularity by introducing new species into their zoo, building cool viewing points for their visitors, and finally, for getting their animals to reproduce. Additionally, protecting your animals and preserving their longevity is something that you'll strive for. Your conservation increases when you contribute to a range of conservation programs, build centers, and when your endangered species breed successfully. Finally, teaching the community is key. Education earned through building education centers, raising public awareness will help to provide bonuses that push your conservation and popularity along at the same time. Think of it as lowering the barriers between humans and animals. Throughout the game, players will acquire and send animals away into the wide world via the Zoo Market board. Each year, different animal species will be on offer and some will be in demand. Players will make trades to take animals into their zoos provided that they have enclosures set up to accommodate their every needs. Animal welfare is your top priority. Each animal species will have different levels of availability. Green means they are ready to be housed in a zoo, whilst red means there is a demand for them to return to the wild. Each player has entry spaces in their zoo to house animals that are not quite ready to go into the zoos that aren't completely set up for them yet. Think of it as animals coming soon. One cool thing about this zoo market is that offspring bred by animals in your zoo can be given to the market to be released into the wild. Hooray! Or they can be used for other players to then introduce into their zoos, keeping the conservation efforts going. Your home is my home. The zoo market is constantly in flux. Each year, the offers and demands of different animal species is going to change based on how you move this sheet around the board. This kind of represents the rise and fall of the population of different animal species around the world. So whilst one species thrives, another may fall, and players are going to have to contend and deal with it. Having a diverse range of animals are a key to a zoo's popularity and success. Each animal in Zoo Tycoon has a unique card associated with it, which kind of looks like a QR code if you ask me. These animal cards outline what your animal needs and are tracked by using these 4 tiny tracker cubes. What I love about these Euro-y looking animal species cards is that each aspect of the card has emulated the true nature of that species in real life. Each animal card specifies what terrain type they prefer, how many animals can share the same enclosure space, how much their running costs will be per tile, as well as whether they can cohabitate with other different species of animals. Interestingly, the gender of your animals are also really important too in terms of how sociable your animals will be. Some animals are happy with any number of males, whilst other enclosures specifically only want one. Each animeeple is even shaded to show their gender. The darker tones are male, whilst the lighter tones are female. Each card features 4 areas that your enclosure needs to have before the animals can move in. It's like designing your dream home before you hire the builders to build it. An important thing to know about these cards is that it outlines the map that will lead to your animal's happiness. Have all the cubes in the dark green zone and your animals will be living their best lives. Have your cubes in the yellow zone and it's an indicator that it's time to clean up your mess. Each animal requires experience in its particular species group, primate, bird, carnivora, or undulate. And the more experience you have here, the faster you advance up the track. Free space is important for allowing your animals to freely roam around their enclosure without feeling trapped, so keeping some enclosure tiles empty is a priority. Having a certain number of retreats will provide your animals with a place to sleep, whilst your group size is important for allowing you to build up your popularity and help improve your animal breeding program. Each card makes you feel like a DJ remixing your own music, or in this case, amplifying the happiness factor of your zoo animals overall. These animal cards are like blueprints that kind of outline the conditions that'll make them happy throughout the game. What I really like about the cards is that they kind of act like little mini goals, which allows players to work towards them, unlock certain features, as well as expanding their zoo and giving players a sense of progression. You'll really want to try and get to the green level super quickly. That'll allow you to gain access to the rarer and more endangered species on the level 2 and 3 sections of the zoo market board. Breeding new animals is one way to not only satisfy your visitors, but it's also a way to contribute to the overall survival of a species. Each animal species in the game reproduces at a different rate. Breeding only occurs if your enclosure has at least one male and one female. To breed, players need to have an overall level of happiness which allows them to roll these wooden dice to determine whether their animals have babies or not. I guess it sometimes does come down to luck. Some animals will allow you to roll a die per female, and some roll a die per pair. Depending on which zone your cube is in will determine which die number you will at least need to get to have a baby. If you are successful, you'll get to draw from this bag, delivered by the stork. You'll also get to place your offspring cube in your enclosure, and earn buzz on the popularity track as well. Offspring in this game is huge. They can be converted into animals, which can lead to further breeding in your zoo, which can force you to expand your zoo enclosures. They can also be given to the zoo market for other players to take into their zoos. It's beautiful, isn't it, to see a species thrive and survive. If it is a level 3 animal species, you'll actually get to earn conservation points. If you are the first to breed a particular animal, you also get to contribute to the worldwide animal breeding program. It all has a cool flow-on effect that fits so thematically into the game. Part of the allure of the original Zoo Tycoon was the puzzle of organizing your park so that your guests could have a cool safari-like experience tailored to your own creative interests. Laying out your zoo enclosures in this game feels like you're filling out a Sudoku. There might be a great name for my next zoo creation, Sudoku Zoo. Throughout the game, building the best enclosures are going to be your main focus as you acquire new terrain tiles each year which come from 3 different biomes: jungle, savanna, or mountain forest. Patterning your enclosure in a contiguous way will create visual points of interest for your animals and guests. Each enclosure tile that you build can also house one focal point only. Yellow focal points, which are unlocked when your animals expand in number, increase your park's popularity. Blue focal points are education zones, which teach your visitors about your animals, which also help you to scoot up the education track. The green focal points can only be built in enclosures that house animals that feature the conservation symbol. They award green conservation points the more focal points that you have in that enclosure. I love these focal points, as I kind of imagine them being like little boardwalks between zoo exhibits that help you climb the ladders to better zoo management. Focal buildings are what I like to call enhancer tiles. They award bonus points for connecting enclosures of particular biomes or even chains of buildings together. The shops can also be accessed later in the game as your zoo increases in popularity. It's like the marketing has finally paid off. Each biome has a matching store, and having both of these base stores allows you to access the high-end biome store. Think of it as the Louis Vuitton of souvenirs. Have a look at these little beauties. By strategically laying these buildings out on your map, you're sure to build a really cool points engine. The primary purpose of the shop tiles is to lower your zoo's overall running costs. As you become responsible for more and more animals, it's going to become quite expensive to look after all of them. So investing in some commercial avenues is going to help you. I'll take 3 board game souvenir hats, thank you very much. Conservation is important to ensure your species succeeds. Zoo Tycoon has multiple ways for you to achieve this. Increase the happiness of your animals and they'll raise the welfare value of your zoo. House animals from particular national parks and you'll earn favour from that country's region. When it comes to board games, I always love to see how the theme of a game really marries with the mechanics. And with Zoo Tycoon, you really essentially have a game that's about earning money, earning popularity, and also looking after these animals through conservation efforts. And the first thing that was immediately apparent to me about this game was that the mechanics are really closely married to the theme of the game and what you're trying to do. The idea that each animal has specific requirements and those requirements need to be fulfilled in terms of their social behavior, their gendering, their happiness level, and also how that happiness leads to their increased breeding rate. And when they breed, it does depend on the composition of males and females and pairings in your animal enclosures. All of that really speaks thematically and really lifts out of the game straight away. I absolutely love the breeding mechanic in this game, and it's nothing that I've ever seen in any sort of other animal themed game where the social behavior of the animals in your enclosure matters, as well as the number of males and females, and then how they pair off, and then rolling those breeding dice to get offspring from a bag, and you're not really going to be sure what gender you get, because if you get a male, offspring, you're going to have to give that away because you don't want another male in a particular species enclosure where there's going to be only one dominant male. So there's so many factors to consider when it comes to breeding your animals, and that fits in with the overall theme of conserving animals and ensuring the longevity of these animal species survival. The breeding mechanic is definitely the highlight of this game. The other thing that I really like is the pre-planning that goes into the game. As you increase your number of animal species in your enclosure, you're going to have to increase the number of free spaces. The animal cards are incredibly unique in terms of how they're tailored and married to the actual behavior and requirements of the animals in real life. That is a beautiful touch. Birds can, live together because they don't require as much space, whereas a black rhinoceros will need one entire closure tile to themselves, plus 3 other free tiles as well. I also think the grading of the different species kind of reflects the idea that, the more experienced you are with species that are easy to manage, the more you're able to access the higher complex endangered species, and the more your credibility increases as well. So if you can handle, a herd of zebras, then you might be ready to handle, the elephants or the pandas, or even later on the orangutans. The long-term conservation goals are really cool as well. The idea that if you're the first to breed a particular level 1 or level 2 species of animals, you can actually move along the worldwide breeding program track. And the more that you breed earlier on, the more you can progress and gain those conservation points. You can also breed level 3 animals, which then allows you to earn more conservation points the more offspring that you produce, even though getting to those offspring is incredibly hard, and getting those level 3 species is also tricky because you also have to have certain other animals already existing in your zoo that kind of represents the experience that you have with that group of animals. The main strategy in Zoo Tycoon revolves around 3 main areas. The game is all about managing restrictions and kind of adapting to what is on offer and what is available. The first puzzle is all about trying to see what animals you can kind of give away when they're in demand, and what animals you really want to house into your zoo, and whether you've got space in your zoo to keep them. The other puzzle that's involved is the spatial planning that happens on your individual zoo board, where you're trying to manage how you're positioning your tiles, where you're placing commercial shops, and how you're trying to get all those enclosures to satisfy the 10 different requirements that each of the animals wants. And when you satisfy those requirements, you've kind of solved that element of the game. And that's the part that I really like, is building the zoo, synergizing tiles, and then placing the animals and seeing if I can find a solution to the situation that's presented in front of me. And as the years progress, your board is going to fill up. You're going to find that it's harder to position certain enclosures. If you want to introduce a new enclosure, you might have to, broaden into the border spaces of your zoo board. The third element of strategy is about how you're going to race up the 3 tracks. How are you going to invest in popularity? By introducing more species, increasing buzz by breeding species, you're going to go up there. But then at the same time, you'll set collecting these animals so that you can satisfy the conservation points. And then the more of these higher level animals that you have, the more you're going to be able to succeed in increasing your value on the conservation track. It is ultimately a race up 3 tracks. This education track is going to really pivot you multiple times across both the conservation and the popularity track. I mean, the puzzle is even added on by these level 0 animals. These level 0 animals are kind of like boost animals that boost your popularity, boost your conservation, but also add to your running costs. So do you include them so they take up important enclosure tile space, or do you use them to boost your value so that you can beef up your values on these tracks? It's those weighted, swingy decisions that you're going to have to decide early on if you're going to succeed in this game. And that also brings me to the point of breeding. Breeding is incredibly fun in this game. However, there is a certain limit. If you breed too much, at the end of the game, you can actually be penalized for having too many offspring in your zoo. It's simply because you just can't look after all of them, and the costs are going to skyrocket, and no amount of shops is going to counter that. But then, when you see that there are certain animals in demand on the zoo market, that might be your chance to give those offspring to the zoo market board for another player to incorporate in their zoo. The idea of this global zoo network of sharing and configuring things and moving species around and hopefully finding that happy place for them is part of what makes your brain tick over. So there are some points to consider if you're thinking about investing in Zoo Tycoon. One of the things that you'll probably notice is that the game is incredibly complex. There are a lot of rules and a lot of rule exceptions that you have to try and get your head around. And upon my first few read-throughs of the rulebook, and I know that this game is still in prototype form and there's still a few changes to be made, in terms of this particular version that I was given, I just found that the rules are really hard to try and work through, and I was always questioning, what did that actually mean? How does that actually work? How do all the different parts fit together? And so I feel like the flow of the game, even though it is about breeding, then trading, then building, then upkeeping, everything feels like its own little separate game, and trying to see how all those little separate things connect together was something that I had to really read deeply into. And so I feel like the learning curve for this game is quite steep. The other aspect is that in the version that I was given, there are a lot of small, tiny cubes, and there's a really tiny triangle wooden piece that you use to track your buzz. And sometimes when I move the board or bump the board, those pieces would move out of place, or they didn't quite, fit because, I bumped the edge of the table and those pieces would shift. I know they're looking at getting larger components for tracking certain things, but that's something I found did hinder my first experience of the game. And the other thing is this zoo market sheet where you have to move and shift the board around, and you only have to do it about 6 times throughout the game to try and change what's on offer and what's on demand. I know that the sheet underneath is getting changed for the final version of the game, but every time I move my board, because my dining table isn't ginormous, sometimes when I move the board I did bump things, and that then made me go back and try and fix things up. So what I'm trying to say is that there are some parts of the game that do feel a little bit fiddly. As with most Euros, this game does come with so many components. There are hundreds of tiles and hundreds of animeeples, but when you do place the animeeples out, they absolutely look so cool. The other thing I'll also mention is that I would have liked to have seen in the game, and maybe they can add this on, is some little scenario cards. Because what I really loved about the original Zoo Tycoon, and I was a huge fan of Rollercoaster Tycoon, was that you could play through scenarios and try and meet certain objectives throughout the game. So maybe in the game, you know, one of the objectives could be build 5 jungle enclosures, and that could be scenario 1, and scenario 2 could be get your popularity to level 40. Just those a little deck of cards that include some of those flavoursome Zoo Tycoon scenarios from the PC game would kind of give this game a little bit more replayability. Because
shelves. They are primitive in their design, yet are one of the most ingenious structures known to humankind. And wait, here is a rare sight. Watch as this avid board gamer as he lays his most favourite Euros on top. Their behaviour of board gamers indicative of their desire to gather, collect games, often still left in their shrink wrap, and in rare circumstances, they actually play with them. Welcome to Life of a Board Gamer.
So the one big question I think you're probably thinking is, how similar is Zoo Tycoon to Ark Nova, one of the biggest zoo-themed games to be released in recent years? Well, the animal cards in Ark Nova function off tags and card effects. So when you play a card and you satisfy the tag requirements in your zoo, you get a particular bonus action or effect. Whereas in Zoo Tycoon, the animal cards are directly related to the setup of your enclosure on your zoo map. They don't really give you extra bonuses other than unlocking like a yellow building focal point. But other than that, it's more centered around the happiness of your animal and how you've spatially configured your zoo. Both games use a small element of worker placement. In Ark Nova, you send your workers to the association board to gain particular effects, connections with other countries and continents, whereas in Zoo Tycoon, you send your workers to activate staff effects and staff actions. That might be having an entertainer increase your popularity, or doubling the effect of a trade when you take from a zoo market board. The workers in Zoo Tycoon are more centered around amplifying the actions that you have, whilst the 5-card row shifting action card system is where you get to amplify your powers in Ark Nova. When it comes to building the physical map of your zoo, Ark Nova comes with lots of different map packs that kind of give you a different focus. It's a little bit more minimalistic in Ark Nova as you try and place them on a hexagonal grid and then cover certain little hexagons to get bonuses that you can kind of synergize and help churn your engine. The enclosures themselves are simply there to house the animals and cover up your board, whilst in Zoo Tycoon, the grid structure is really trying to reflect the isometric view of the original PC game, where the size and the contiguous nature of your enclosure is ever fluid. It's always expanding. It's always getting bigger as the game progresses, and how you deal with that modification of space is something that you'll have to tackle in this game. Whereas in Ark Nova, you're tackling that modification of space closer to the end of the game, because as you kind of fill up your map board, you know, you've got less places to place all those different enclosure tiles. The conservation strategy is quite similar in terms of the fact that they're both long-term goals. In Ark Nova, the conservation cards that come up in the deck can kind of change what goals you go for, whereas in Zoo Tycoon, the conservation goals are outlined from the start of the game and remain the same each time you play. In terms of how each game feels to me, Ark Nova is a little bit more random. There's so many cards in that card deck that you kind of adapt your strategy as you see the cards come out in the market as well as into your hands. For me, Ark Nova feels like the Agricola of zoo gaming, whereas in Zoo Tycoon, you see all the options out from the get-go. You know all the animals, you know what you can do, you know what's available to you and how you're going to access them. So for me, Zoo Tycoon feels like the Caverna of zoo building. So, what do you think of Zoo Tycoon overall? Please let me know by writing in the comments section below. If you really like my content, please consider heading over to my Patreon page and supporting me there, or giving me a like and a subscribe. I would truly appreciate it. Now, if you really want to see more board game content, head over to my YouTube page and check out Ark Nova versus Terraforming Mars. That's a really cool comparison video where I dive deep into two really meaty Euro games, something they should worth checking out. This is Danny signing out. Can't wait to see you again soon. G'day from down under, and enjoy your next board game. Goodbye!